Okay, on January 13th, my client Anthony Jones, while lawfully visiting a friend out on Roosevelt Island at his apartment building, was rushed by a public safety security officer from the island. On Roosevelt Island, the police force is the public safety security officers. He was handcuffed by them, he was maced, he was beaten, he was kicked, he was punched, he was slammed to the ground and subdued while in handcuffs. They took him to the detention center on Roosevelt Island, where his physical condition began to deteriorate. He was coughing up blood and spitting up blood, and obviously hemorrhaging from his lungs. He was taken to a hospital by the safety officers, and he was admitted into the hospital for 7 days with several fractured ribs, a hemothorax, hemorrhaging from his lungs, blood, and several other injuries that he's being treated for right now. He came very close to dying in the hospital. Mr. Jones was not charged with a crime. Mr. Jones was not processed. There was absolutely nothing. He was basically beaten, taken to the police station there, the detention center, taken to a hospital, and then let go. There were no charges preferred. What happened to Anthony Jones on Roosevelt Island is not an isolated incident. This has been going on for years. The Roosevelt Island Security Force has very similar responsibilities and duties and can take similar actions to the NYPD. They can arrest, they can detain, they can issue summons and tickets, they can use force. However, on Roosevelt Island, peculiarly, there is no accountability for their actions and excesses and abuses. The NYPD has the Internal Affairs Bureau, the NYPD has the CCRB, which is Civilian Community Complaint Review Board. Roosevelt Island doesn't have any of that. In fact, in order to make a complaint against these security officers, you have to go to the security department themselves and make it against them, which is an extremely intimidating action for those who have been abused by the security officers. What's happening on Roosevelt Island is very simple. The police are not being policed. In many actions, in many incidences that have happened over the years, it appears that they are imposing martial law over many of its residences and violating constitutional rights. There are beatings, they are committing beatings, they're arresting falsely, they're conferring curfews pell-mell upon many of the residents. They use intimidation tactics. They're violating Miranda rights and constitutional rights that we all take for granted. The rule is violations of the law, not the exception, by these security officers. There is no accountability. When there is no accountability, it leads to abuse. Now, the people who run the island, Roosevelt Island, is basically a corporation. It's run by 9 directors that are politically appointed and not locally elected, which of course can lead to even more abuse. As I said, this is not an isolated incident. There has been many, many instances and lawsuits. My office in this week alone has filed 3 notice of claims for separate distinct incidences similar to what happened to Mr. Jones. The citizens of Roosevelt Island demand immediate change. There must be something done. Presently, there is a bill being forwarded by State Assemblyman Mika Kelmer to bring some accountability to these security officers. That bill basically has been pushed around the Assembly for a long time and doesn't seem to be going anywhere. In the meantime, people are getting hurt, people are being abused, people's constitutional rights are being abridged. There's a problem on Roosevelt Island, and we must look at it, and we must do something temporarily to stop it, and look to our state assemblymen to create laws so that this will not happen in the future. To address some of the issues, we have representatives. To address some of the issues that I've outlaid here, we have Frank Ferrance, a member of the Roosevelt Island Public Safety Committee. We have Erin Feely-Nam, who's a member of the Roosevelt Island Resident Safety Committee, who would like to speak. Before I do this, I have Anthony Jones sitting here with me. I do not have my other clients who've been similarly situated, similarly injured. That's for another day. But Monica Vega, Anthony Jones' mother, would like to address the press and express her feelings to you. Monica.
My name is Monica Vega, and I'm Anthony's mother. Public safety are abusing their power of authority on Roosevelt Island against these children. They have grown up on Roosevelt Island. My son has gone to school, elementary on PS 217. He's never been in trouble. Always been a good kid. Plays basketball, hangs out with his friends in front of the deli, walks around, goes to the park, minds his business. Never got into any altercations with public safety. This has been the first time, and they almost killed my child. My son lost 8 pounds in the hospital. I saw him deteriorate in front of my eyes. They wouldn't let me see him for 4 days. When I finally got to the hospital, he lost 3 liters of blood, fractured ribs, a broken tooth, lacerations to the face. I was devastated and hurt that they did this to my son. I say hi to them every morning. They see me with my children. They say good morning, good afternoon to me. They know me. They could have came to my house and my son did anything. Not once did they come to me. They called me the next day and told me my son was in the hospital because he was arrested. And then I said, well, why didn't he call me? They said, well, you're lucky we called you anyway. This is a courtesy call. I said, also, if my son would have died, this would have been a courtesy call also. They hurt my child. Unbelievable. Inside and out. Hurt me inside and out. I can't believe they did this to him. And I'm very hurt by that. And they lost all respect from me. I want them out of my community, away from my children, away from other children. He could have died. He could have honestly died. And I was told that by Chief Guerrero. He said had he had died in their custody, Chief Guerrero, get that name right, Chief Keith Guerrero said, had my son died in their hands, it would have been murder. It would have been murder. My son almost died in their hands for nothing at all. He's not a criminal. He doesn't have a record. He's a good kid. He's graduated high school. He went to college. He didn't complete it, but he tried. We're going to get him back in. But I'm telling you, they have to go. They have to go. This has been happening for too long. Committees and meetings. This is not working. They have to go. I'm devastated that this happened to my son. I don't ever want it to ever happen to no one else. I'm really am hurt behind this. My son was treated like a murderer, like a criminal, like he committed something and he didn't. He didn't do anything. But just try to be in his community. This is his home. This is where he lives. He should be able to be walking freely where he lives and enjoy Roosevelt Island without having to be worried about people coming to harass him and kick him and hurt him because he lives somewhere and they trying to portray something and they're not. They're totally not what they are. They are gangs. Public safety is like a gang. They beat these kids and they terrorize them. That's all they do, and they're giving them a record. And that's not fair to these kids. They have a future ahead. They're rearranging their faces, their lives, and everything. I just want justice for all of them and for my son. Because if I wouldn't be standing here right now, I could have been planning a funeral for my son.
Ms. Vega brings up a very important point. There's been so many arrests by these security officers of the youths out on Roosevelt Island. Many of they're co-opting the future of many of these youths who absolutely have done nothing wrong other than to play in front of a building or get the ire of one of the security officers. They're giving records to good kids, and they're jeopardizing the future of these children. I have Anthony Jones sitting here with us today. Per my press release, I said that he would be available for comment. He's still recuperating from several fractured ribs and punctured lungs, and he's finding it very difficult to talk. And breathing is his breathing is affected by it as well. So I'm not going to be able to allow you guys to speak to him. Is there any questions?
Even very briefly, is there a way you can just have him tell us how he's feeling and then sit him right down so we can hear something from him?
I don't. I would love to be able to do that for you, but it's really the answer is I can't. He cannot. I asked him that. He just is not. Medically, he's healthy, he cannot. He's not, his health precludes it.
Is this a case for the Manhattan District Attorney's Office to open a criminal investigation into the behavior of these officers?
I believe that it certainly is. I believe the behavior of these security officers is repugnant. I believe their actions are not just unconstitutional, but the acts of martial law in some ways. They're treating these youths as if they're enemy combatants. The abuses are historic. It's been going on way too long. There is no accountability. The DA's office should step in. Yes.
When you say way too long, are you talking years? What, is it part of culture there already? I mean, explain how long.
It's been going on for years. I can't tell you with certainty the amount of years. I can tell you that's been going on for years. If you take a look through public files and see all the lawsuits that have been filed over the years, if you look at all the complaints that have been made, if you foil some of those complaints, you'll see that these are not isolated incidences. There is a pattern here of abuse. And there's been a pattern here of unconstitutional behavior by these police officers, by these security officers.
Any idea how many lawsuits have been filed over the years?
Many. I have 3 pending, possibly 4 myself, for my clients.
You indicated at some point there was cell phone video or something that demonstrates what these officers were doing to Anthony. Do you have any of that? Or?
Of course, the investigation is ongoing, and getting those videotapes and presenting them to the press logistically was not possible today. But yes, there are videotapes that were accumulated.
The governor appoints the members of RIOC, right? The Roosevelt Island Operating Authority.
RIOC, that's correct.
Has there been any communication with the governor's office to step up?
Well, that would be a question that I think should be directed to either Frank Ferrance or Aaron Freely-Mayhem, who are on the Public Safety Committee over at Roosevelt Island.
Can you describe what actually occurred? Where was the first encounter between Anthony and the Public Safety Department? What happened after that encounter, and where did the beating take place?
I believe I already addressed that, but I'll address it again if I wasn't clear. It was at a building. It was at a building where Anthony was waiting for a friend to come out. He was lawfully at the building. There was no trespass. The security officers rushed him. for no apparent reason. He was not committing any offense. There was no illegality. Rushed him. They handcuffed him, and then the beating started. He was maced. He was kicked. He was punched. He was picked
At
up
the building?
At the building. That's correct.
First the handcuffs, then the mace, and then the beating? Is that the order of events?
Well, obviously they had to subdue him to put the handcuffs on.
Is it true that?
But there was no allegation of resisting arrest. There was no criminality charged. There are witnesses that we have that will attest to what I just said. And there were no trespass charges, as his mom has just said.
Is it true that he was handcuffed in the hospital and guarded?
He was handcuffed for 5 days to his bed while the security officers stood over him. That is correct.
And was Ms. Vega permitted to see him at any point?
The first couple of days, she was not permitted to see him at all.
And was she threatened with arrest if she came back?
Yes, she was. She certainly was. Some of the phone calls that were made to Ms. Vega, who's also my client, obviously, were of an intimidating manner by Chief Guerra.
Sir, is his allegation that these officers rushed him out of thin air, or did they perceive some behavior to be taking place in front of the building?
I obviously can't tell you what they perceived. I can tell you that the answer to your question is, if you want to use the term rush them out of thin air, yeah, that's exactly what happened. And it's not just one incident, it's many incidences for which I represent at least 3 other people for very similar circumstances. That's correct. These officers are acting like Wyatt Earp out in the West.
Can you identify your other clients, please?
I cannot do that without your permission, but it's a matter of public record, and any notice of claim or lawsuit that I file is on a matter of public record.
Did they ever question him about any crime that you know of, or tell him he was suspected of any crime, even after they had him on the ground?
They didn't talk to him about any crime because he couldn't talk. He was too badly beaten.
Can you describe the nature of the phone call from Chief Guerra to Mrs. Vega? What was the intimidating nature of the call?
Monica, do you mind talking about that?
When I told, actually he called me. When he had called me, he noticed there was something in the blog about Anthony's issue, situation, sorry. When he called, he said, oh, is this how you want to handle it? But very strongly, in a strong voice, intimidating me. This is how you want to handle things? Oh, really? Is this how we're going to do things? That's how he talked to me, and he says, okay, well, this is in the blog. Did you speak to Frank Fernandez? Did you give him any comments? What did you say to him? And I said, don't call me anymore. Call my lawyer, and I hung up the phone.
Were there any other communications after that?
After that, no. That was it, but in that conversation, he said, had Anthony died, it would have been murder, and it would have looked like they did it. Because if Anthony would have died in their custody, it would have looked like they murdered him. And he also, what was the other comment he made? Let me think for a minute. He also made a comment and said, oh, this is a lesson learned to Anthony. May this be a lesson learned to him because we can make arrests like police officers.
When you say he said if Anthony had died, they would have committed a murder?
No, he said had Anthony had died in their custody, it would have seemed like it was murder.
By the public safety
By
department?
public safety.
So therefore what?
Yeah, so that meant it was okay for them to keep him handcuffed to a bed?
They kept him handcuffed. They didn't change him. When I say my son was in bad shape, when I got there on the 4th day, they told me I was not allowed to the hospital. I wasn't allowed to call him. Soon as I got my lawyer, they took his phone from his room. They told me he wasn't allowed any visitors. When the lawyer finally got there, she saw him on Tuesday. I think I saw him that Wednesday, and he was still handcuffed. They hadn't bathed him in 4 days. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I think it was Wednesday. They didn't bathe him. He was. They didn't change his linens. The hospital wasn't. There was no housekeeping. The nurses were treating him like he committed a crime, like a criminal. And they would not go in the room. They would not talk to my son. They were talking to the officers. When I went in there was an officer there said, if you stay here, I'm gonna have to arrest you. I'm gonna have to summons you. You have to leave. And that's how they treated my son. I had to watch my son from the door with a tube this big in his chest with a thing on the floor with blood, full of blood. He had lacerations to the face, chipped tooth. I'm just like, well, how is all of this happening just for standing around? Yeah. Who does that? Who does that? And when I went to the hospital, I had to get the nurses there to treat him like a patient. I went to the patient's representative and I told him, this is not how you treat a patient. He's not a criminal. You don't treat him like that. He's a patient. He's a human being. Treat him as so. I want his linens to be changed. I want someone in this room right now to clean him up. He was full of blood, and he had an odor, and I couldn't believe how they treated him.
Was the police?
Obviously, when somebody's identified, in the hospital, when you have the security officers handcuffing him to the bed for 5 days, it's going to, in some ways, change the way the doctors and medical officials or the medical personnel treat that person in the hospital. I think that's what happened here. We had the security officers there 24/7 for 5 straight days. I don't know what the purpose of them being there was, but they were there for 5 days. So, any other questions?
Yes. Do you think the purpose of them being there was in any way to keep him away from police, so that he couldn't report what had happened to him?
I don't know what's in the mind of these security officers. I question why they were there, and your mind can run the gamut of different permutations of the reasons for them being there. Maybe intimidation, possibly. I don't know.
Do you have any communications, Ms. Baker, do you have any communications with police about what involvement or knowledge they may have had about where your son was and what was going on?
When you say police, you're talking about the security officers.
No.
NYPD. I called NYPD the next day. When they called me with a courtesy call, as they call it, a courtesy call that my son was arrested and in the hospital. When I called NYPD to make a report, they said they cannot make a report under them in their department because they're not under the, what is it, the
NYPD.
the CCRB.
CCRB.
They're not under that CCRB.
There is no accountability.
So they couldn't make no report of that. So when I asked for the badge number of the arresting officer and the name, he gave me a false name and a false badge number. And when I asked to speak to the arresting officer, he said, you can't speak to him. I said, what? I need to see my son. Oh, you can't see your son. He's incarcerated. He's in the hospital.
The NYPD told you that?
No, that was Hernandez, Chief Hernandez from Roosevelt Island.
That's a security officer.
He's not chief, sorry, he's
Officer.
security, he's an officer. The chief is Keith Guerrero, he's another one.
Do you know who the officers were?
I do.
All right, come on. All right. What's wrong?
His name is Torrin. Officer Torrin. Torrin with a T. Officer Torrin. He's the officer. I know there was another officer there, was Michaels, Officer Michaels, was another officer. I don't know who was the other one, Zykis, but officer, yeah, I don't wanna say any wrong names, but the one that impacted these injuries on my son is
Okay. All right. Ms. Vega's done right now. Is there any other questions?
Were the officers at the hospital in uniform or plain clothes? Uniform.
They're uniformed security officers. No, it's nothing.
He was in there.
Okay. Any other questions?